there's a tax increase that not a lot of people are talking about. It's the payroll tax cut that was taken away. I remember President Obama had pushed for the payroll tax cut, but this time around he didn't push at all, and it's gone. Now, I don't mind that because I think that it could jeopardize Social Security if you keep taking away from the payroll tax, right? Now, and I'm not a fan of tax cuts, but understand that this is a tax cut that actually everybody should be talking about because it affects 160 million Americans. In fact, it's $80 a month. We did some quick math. Turns out that's $960 a year if you're making $50,000, which is the average salary in America. Okay, so that's about $1,000 out of all of our pockets, out of 160 million people, but hardly a word is said about that. Meanwhile, everybody's talking about like, oh my God, they raised tax on people making $450,000 by a little bit. Well, while, by the way, quietly giving them huge tax breaks on the stuff they actually cared about, which is carried interest, capital gains, estate tax, dividend, etc. Right? So, but that's not all they gave away. Because you're not going to get a deal without the cooperation of corporations. Because, in fact, corporate cash rules the world. It certainly rules America. Now, you might have been curious because a lot of the CEOs went to the White House recently and started talking about how they were in favor of raising taxes. And you think, really? Why would they say that? You remember when they had this meeting?
Some of the nation's top CEOs urging Washington to avert the so-called fiscal cliff. The CEOs of GE, American Express, PepsiCo, Honeywell, and IBM among those meeting with President Obama.
I think you'll start to see the president exercise some more leadership here and be more out front on everything, getting across that point about how we need to work together.
The Business Roundtable, a lobbying group of the country's leading CEOs, began running print, radio, and web spots to pressure congressional Democrats and Republicans to set aside their differences.
So now, why would they do that? Why would they pressure Republicans and even run ads in favor of a deal where their taxes would be raised? Because secretly, they were getting tax cuts that were much larger than the small increases on the top bracket. So let me tell you about that. First, the smaller ones. Now, NASCAR, as you might have heard, has gotten a huge break, but you might not know how much money they spent. Well, NASCAR spent $300,000 lobbying, and the International Speedway Corporation, which is also, of course, related to NASCAR racing, spent $1.1 million in lobbying. Now, that's a lot of lobbying, $1.4 million. What did they get in return in this tax deal? Well, they got $141 million in tax breaks through 2017. Let me do some quick math for you. If you spend $1.4 million and you get $140 million back, that is 100 times your money. Now, is there a better place to go if you want to make money than the United States Congress? You just go and hand out a little bit of money, they give you 100 times in return. Now, they're not alone. Tax credits for railroads for maintaining their tracks, $165 million a year. Now, I'm in favor of railroads, but I believe their primary job is to maintain their tracks. Why am I paying $165 million to make that happen? But they lobby, they get a $165 million subsidy. How about Hollywood? Hollywood is very connected to the Democratic Party. Well, we're handing out gifts, aren't we? So they get $150 million in subsidies. My sense of it is that Hollywood is a fairly profitable industry and that they don't really need too many subsidies, but hey, if you got friends in high places, you get those subsidies anyway. But that's all small potatoes until you get to Wall Street. Now, Wall Street has already fixed the rules so much to their advantage that between 2008 and 2010, even though the corporate tax rate is 35%, their effective tax rate, in other words, the rate they actually paid, was 15.5%. Let me do some quick math for you. That's about 20% less. Now, in reality, of course, it's more than it depends on how you do the math. It's 30, instead of paying 35, they paid 15. But if you're supposed to pay 35 and you only paid 15, you actually saved over 100% in terms of the money you were supposed to be paying. Man, lobbying is a great idea. You know, Enron used to call their accounting office where they were supposed to pay taxes, but of course, like a lot of these corporations, they didn't. They called it a profit center. Because how do you make profit? Well, you don't have to actually sell things and have people buy them. You just go over to the government and get your tax breaks and your tax loopholes so you pay less and less taxes and then you pocket it. Well, we're just getting to the meat of this stuff. We haven't even gotten to the best part. This corporate CEOs argued for two exemptions that were very specific. One was called a pass-through exemption. It's an accounting trick where you get to do a foreign subsidiary, you pass the money through the foreign subsidiary, and then you don't have to pay the taxes. On that alone, they saved $1.5 billion for just 2 years. Now that's $1.5 billion that was supposed to come to the American taxpayer, pay for your kids' education, pay for your roads, your bridges, your cops, your firemen, but it's gone. It's back in the corporations' pockets. Why? So why do you think they went out there and they're like, oh, we think we should do this deal? Yeah, my taxes are going to go up a couple of dollars over here, and then you give me $1.5 billion, okay? And I'll make this thing happen for you. Corporations run this country. There's no reason for that to go through. $1.5 billion out of our pockets straight into theirs, but we're not done yet. Now, part of the way that they do all this, and there was this group called the Active Finance Working Group. They represent just 20 corporations, and they wanted a very specific loophole. And part of the way they did it was they went to a former top Democratic congressional aide-turned lobbyist, Steve Elmendorf. Now, this guy is very powerful in Washington, one of the top lobbyists, and Elmendorf, earned $1.2 million in lobbying fees for just this one loophole the Active Finance Working Group was pushing for. Now, there's a group of 20 companies, including JP Morgan, GE. Oh, right, the GE CEO was part of that story we showed you earlier. And Ford, wow, they also work with the administration. And so how much of a loophole did they get in this fiscal cliff deal? With almost none of the press paying attention, they got a gift of $11.2 billion. And that's just over 2 years. And that's how it works, man. The reason the CEOs wanted the government to sign that deal is because when you just put together the last two exemptions I told you about, they got over $12 billion to be in favor of the deal. Well, if you got $12 billion, you'd be in favor of that deal too. And this is how our government works. Nothing gets done until the corporations say, you give me the money first. The pain goes to everyone else. The money comes to me. Speaking of which, Lloyd Blankfein, the CEO of Goldman Sachs, during all of this, while he was pretending to be in favor of tax increases, also said this on television.
You're going to have to undoubtedly do something to lower people's expectations, the entitlements, and what people think that they're going to get, because they're not going to get it.
No, you're not going to get it. Those entitlements he's talking about is Social Security and Medicare. You're not going to get that. We have to lower your expectations. Now, did Goldman Sachs lower their expectations in this deal? As usual, nope. They got a $1.6 billion tax-free financing for their new headquarters in downtown New York. Now that's cool. They say, no, it's because of 9/11. That's called a York Liberty Zone, where we liberate $1.6 billion and head it over into Goldman Sachs' direction. And that guy has the nerve to go on TV talking about how you have to sacrifice your Social Security and Medicare while he knows that deal is actually going to get him an enormous tax cut. Not a tax increase, a tax cut. We are robbed day in and day out by these guys who have set up a legalized bribery system in America and have bought our politicians. Both Democrats and Republicans work for these guys. They don't work for us.